they actually put on their coding test, hey, and they tell the hiring manager as well, I know I can code this, but this pressure of this online test is too much, and I can't code it in a lot of time. But I can write down the pseudocode and write down my logic of how I would solve this because I'm better at thinking that I'm just a slower coder because I'm new into this field. And that has worked. Hiring managers
Oh,
have looked
wow.
at the results and realized, okay, that makes sense.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Data Scientist Show. Today, we have Andrew Barry. Andrew is a data science educator. He teaches data science, coaches aspiring data scientists, and design courses. At Lighthouse Labs, he has worked with over 100 students from various backgrounds trying to transition into data science. He hosts two podcasts. One is called The Pandemic Job Hunt, breaking down the keys to landing a job and to inspire job seekers with out-of-box ideas. The second being the Little Big Idea Show, a podcast that identifies little ideas that could have a big impact, focusing on topics that improve one's happiness. Welcome to the show, Andrew.
Pleasure to be here. I'm happy to be here.
How did you get into data science? Let's start with your career journey.
Yeah, I'll start a little bit about my background. I would say I have a very untraditional data science journey with a lot of folks. Similar to a lot of folks I actually coached to become a data scientist. My background was non-coding. I didn't have any quantitative background at all. I went to school following a regular business degree. I graduated with a finance and information systems degree at McGill University. Then after university, I told myself, like, what do I want to do? I always wanted to get into tech, but I didn't have any hard skills at all. I didn't know how to code. I never touched programming or Python or R at all. I just didn't know where to start. But I knew I wanted to be in tech seems because tech seemed exciting and tech seemed to be like the future of where the main growth of major industries are growing. And I need to figure out my transition into that world. So I thought to myself, okay, what skills can I leverage right now? So I have a business degree, I have some business sense. Then I saw that data science felt to be the perfect intersection between hardcore programming, such as someone who's a software engineer, software developer, to someone who's more business focused. And I thought data science was that perfect intersection because you are bridging the two together and you're just trying to solve problems that can give some economic gain to whatever a company you're working for or a problem you're trying to solve. So I told myself, okay, let me figure out how do I get into this world of data and this world of data science. I actually enrolled myself in a boot camp. That's how I learned how to code, learned how to think like a data scientist, just getting the foundations right. The 0 to 100, that was in an intense 3-month program that I did in Toronto. And after that program, I was actually doing some data analytics works just to like get some experience, understand how to ask the correct questions, how to talk to the right stakeholders, just to get a better understanding what this world data is and understand how to intuitively communicate the insights of data to the right stakeholders. And it was my first taste of working with data in a professional setting. But luckily, after I finished my boot camp, I was actually quickly hired from the same boot camp
Oh,
to
nice.
be on the other side of the role. So instead of being a student, I was an instructor as well. And in that role, I taught students, I mentored students, I worked alongside my instructors who taught me a few months back. It was a weird transition because when you're a student, there is this power dynamic that you have with your instructor because they are the person who taught you all these skills and they knew so much. And it was a bit weird to kind of work alongside with them, but eventually I overcame that student power dynamic and realized, oh, they're my colleagues. But in this role, I think one of the biggest value I added was I was a student beforehand. I knew that experience of being a student. I can empathize with the new students and also provide recommendations on how to improve the course that's more student friendly. Because as a student, I think I realized, oh, there's a few things here and there they could improve to make the experience a lot better, or could make the learning a lot better. Because the whole goal of these boot camps at the end of the day is to take someone who is non-technical, like myself, to become technical in a few months. And that's a very hard thing to do. That's because data science is such a broad field, and not just broad in terms of number of subjects. You have to have strong in-depth knowledge of each subject in itself. After I worked at my last employer, I was actually hired by my current employer, Lighthouse Labs, at the beginning of when they launched their data science program. So the data science bootcamp world was just starting, and it was kind of booming across Canada and also the United States. And more boot camps that were traditionally focused on just traditional software engineering or web development decided this is a good opportunity to get into data science. So I joined another boot camp where I'm currently working in, and I joined the beginning of when they launched their new data science program. And in my current role now, I'm a data science educator. And like the intro you said, I do a variety of tasks, from teaching data science, coaching students, to even like designing courses and figuring out what is the best way to deliver a content to someone who is non-technical. And that's a big challenge in itself, because we have like a variety of backgrounds of different students. You have to kind of tailor each coaching session or tailor each lecture for them to understand it quickly and get it intuitively. It's different compared to teaching someone who has a strong quantitative background, or who has, I would say, 2-3 years of programming experience. It's a different challenge. And that's what I'm trying to do, is how to help folks transition to tech, and specifically in the data science realm. And that's my journey so far in data science. I've been in the space, I would say, about 2.5 years now. So I'm relatively new in the data science world, but I'm enjoying my time so far.
Cool. So you mentioned sometimes for people coming from a non-technical background, it's very hard for them to learn data science and programming. And you came from the same journey, so you can identify what are some of their struggles and design a course. So can you share with us what are some struggles people usually have, and if they currently encounter that through their self-learning journey, how can they overcome those things better?
I would say that in the boot camp itself, or in their initial learning experience, when trying to get the foundations, there's a lot of key struggles that it's hard to grasp for a lot of students who come from a non-technical background. And the first thing is just understanding how to program, understand how to computer things, how to write the code beautifully. That takes some time to learn. And one way we actually try to enforce this learning is to have them program all the time, every single day, just to reinforce that learning. So programming correctly is very difficult, and being able to understand that you can rely on Google as your second brain to look at Stack Overflow, to look at documentation, to get your job done. So a lot of students, I find, generally think they got to memorize every single function, every single plugin, every single technology that we kind of throw at in a data science boot camp. And the answer is no, you don't have to memorize every single thing. And students get really stuck at understanding the fine details of it, which, it's encouraging to see, but it slows down their learning. And the goal is to have them quickly learn something. So if they forget a particular function or forget how to do something, they can either refer to their notes, do a quick Google search, maybe something in Stack Overflow or just a documentation, and quickly implement whatever they read into their code and get it to work. And that's the one thing a lot of students struggle is accepting the fact that they can't memorize everything, and they got to rely on a second brain, which is Google in this sense. And every data scientist I know does that. And even for me, sometimes the simplest functions I use, I constantly forget. There's one function for some reason I always forget is how to drop a column in pandas. I always Google it, even though I've used it so many times. It's just something my brain always just forgets, and I will memorize like the more specific TensorFlow function, but sometimes pandas I just forget. So that's one big issue. The second thing is statistics. I think statistics is very difficult to grasp for someone who doesn't have any probability and statistical background. It's also one of those subjects where people tend in university and in high school tend not to do too well because it's hard to teach. It's hard to conceptualize in your head how to work with probabilities and basic statistics. So spending more time on statistics is a very important thing for us instructors and us bootcamp organizers to teach them and try to reinforce that throughout the course of like why are you using statistics, how to do the correct hypothesis test, how to correctly think about a hypothesis test in relation to some sort of context. That requires a lot of reinforcement and a lot of examples for them to finally get. So statistics is the second thing. And I think the third thing that a lot of students struggles with is surprising is TensorFlow sometimes. When they are working in learning the data science and learning how to program, within the first 6 to 7 weeks, they're still fresh from sklearn, they're still fresh from all the other concepts they're trying to learn. They're not just learning how to program, but they're also trying to learn the theory behind everything. After diving into classical machine learning and going to deep learning, they're working with TensorFlow. There's usually that little gap between TensorFlow and programming in TensorFlow and programming, say, in classical methods with sklearn. Is a little bit of a challenge for students too.
Yeah.
And that's
how can they overcome this challenge?
That's a great question. Overcoming the challenge between classical to TensorFlow and deep learning, I think there's two things here. First, students are generally overwhelmed with the classical methods already because it's all new to them and there's still so much to know, and they're a very powerful thing to know. And they need to spend some more time understanding the business implications of the classical methods. What I mean by that is understanding when and where to use the classical methods first in some business context. So spend more time honing their skills. And number two, for the TensorFlow, getting to deep learning, getting to neural networks and working with TensorFlow, the second thing they got to do is spend a lot of time working on the basics and learning how to manipulate the data. And working with tensors in itself can be challenging for someone who doesn't know how to work with tensors. They traditionally work with data frames and put that into sklearn. Doing that transition slowly just requires a lot of time and effort. And the thing is, do not rush that learning process. Don't rush the TensorFlow learning process. Try to start from scratch and give them the fundamentals and first principles of how to build an architecture from scratch. But building architecture from scratch in TensorFlow, but also understanding how to build a different types of architectures, such as something for a classical neural network, maybe something with CNNs, or something where you use NLP. Learning the differences can be a little bit challenging as an initial student, but just taking them slowly and holding their hand to give them the foundations and then slowly build their confidence so that they don't rely on coaches anymore. They can rely on their own confidence to look at Google to kind of self-teach themselves is a win on my end.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And you mentioned students need to understand when to use classical machine learning, when to use deep learning. Can you give us some examples? How do we differentiate those cases?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's a misconception in data science community, especially for someone who is just learning data science, is you need to use the most advanced deep learning tool that's cutting edge, that has a recent paper came out, and use that to solve whatever business problem you're trying to solve. That's a misconception a lot of students get, because when we go into deep learning, we always say, oh, it's so powerful. The accuracies are so much better. It's cutting edge. Everyone's using it. But that's not always the case. Deep learning is very hard to do. It's time consuming. It's computationally inefficient compared to classical machine learning. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of money. And sometimes what they need to do is look at the business problem. That's one thing I always forget. Like, what is the underlying business problem they're trying to solve? Can it be solved with a simple regression? Can it be solved with a simple, say, classification? If they're doing a simple fraud detection, do they really need to use the latest and greatest deep learning method to solve fraud detection, where they try to maximize their recall score? They can do that, but they can also achieve the same thing with a classical, say, random forest classifier and still receive pretty decent scores, where the difference between the classical method and the deep learning method might just be a few percentage points. And the question you have to ask yourself, is it worth that increase in percentage points, or is the model good enough? And that's something I think it's very hard to teach. Like, when is a model good enough? And what I usually say, the model is good enough when you achieve the problem of solving the business problem in the first half. If you can solve the business problem with the most basic model you can think of, then you're good to go. Then you can spend more time improving this model if you would like, but always focus on the underlying business problem. Can you solve it? Yes or no? Can you solve it through a simple model? Yes or no? And when do you want to use a deep learning algorithm? So many business problems don't need a deep learning algorithm. Deep learning, that's usually reserved for a lot of like image classifiers or some advanced NLP processes. But there's so many use cases where simple models just work.
Yeah,
a linear regression just works,
right?
In many sense.
Yeah,
I'm sure you've experienced that in your role as well.
I completely agree with you. I always advocate start with a simple model, even if in the later process you are going to use a neural network, but use a simple model, understand your data first, get a baseline, and then decide whether you want to use deep learning. And it's also important to know when it's good enough, because there's always a million things you can improve, but business needs to solve problems within a certain amount of time. So always consider the time, cost as a resource. So sometimes when you think about a machine learning project, you're also solving an optimization problem.
Yep.
Right. So you mentioned coding, and you also teach deep learning in the program. And there are different types of data scientists. So there are some data scientists focusing on product analytics. Some data scientists do machine learning, deep learning. So can you give us an overview of the data science interview landscape? What type of data science interview are out there, and what kind of subjects should people prepare?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it depends. At the end of the day, it depends on many things. It depends on the size of the company. It depends on the type of company it is. Is it a startup that's just starting out? Is it a more established company that has been around for a decade at least? Or is it work for a more traditional Fortune 500 company? It really depends on the different companies in itself. And I think one metric you should look for is, what is the size of the company itself? So if it's usually a larger size companies, the data science role is a lot more defined, where you're just focusing on solving problems. You might not be building the most cutting edge solutions, but you're solving problems, probably doing some A/B testing. And so you have to refine your statistical skills. You'll always refine your SQL skills, and able to answer case-based questions or product sense questions in those larger companies. In the smaller companies, usually they don't even require much deep learning at all. You don't need to know TensorFlow. You don't need to know PyTorch. You need to know how to solve problems, need to know how to wrangle data very well, so that either is through pandas or through PySpark, or even just strong SQL skills in itself. So one thing you look for is the different size of the companies. And also one thing I noticed in smaller companies, the term data scientists can just be a glorified data analytics or data analyst. So that's something to be very careful about reading in the job description. And the best thing I tell my students is look at what the company is doing and trying to understand like what they're trying to solve. If this company is using a lot of NLP models and NLP processes, then you have to really study up on your NLP skills, understand how NLTK works, understand how NLP is used in a deep learning methodology or a deep learning toolkit. understand this. Don't spend too much time understanding stuff such as maybe recommender engines or say image classifier, because this company is focused on NLP. So this is where you can a bit, I would say, specialize on your interest. At the boot camp, we give them the foundation for them to set themselves up for success. And that foundation gives them the ability to problem solve, the ability to code, and the confidence to kind of dive into each niche that they're interested in. So if they want to go into image classification, they can spend more time on OpenCV, spend more time on that world. If they're interested in, say, reinforcement learning, they can spend more time in that world and develop those skills. And this is where they can really specialize a little bit. But going back to the interview process, data science interview is very broad, but there is some commonalities between all of them too. Those commonalities are always starts with a technical interview. In this technical interview, it's usually 2 to 3 parts. I usually say 2 because the first part is where you're not really speaking to anyone. It's all self-paced. The second part is where you're actually speaking to a hiring manager or a data scientist who knows their stuff. In the first part, it's usually a screening test. And the screening test could be an online coding test. It could be timed 1 hour, 2 hours, and sometimes you don't even solve anything data science-y. You're just doing some logic problems or some SQL problems. And in those screening tests, they just want to see, can you code? Because at the end of the day, you need to know how to code, but you don't need to know how to code like a software developer or software engineer. You need to know at least the basics to solve a problem and get things done. So the questions that are usually asked in those coding problems are not that difficult. I would say I will compare them to, say, medium to easy level on LeetCode. If you just go on LeetCode, the difficulty challenges, and the hard and the other more difficult coding questions are usually reserved for software engineers. So that's one thing for a newbie to come into this world, is they don't need to know that much coding, but enough coding. After the screening test, either it could be online or it could be a take-home assessment. And that take-home assessment, it could be as simple as just doing one aspect of the data science workflow or the data science lifecycle. It could be just spend, say, 4 hours doing all the feature engineering that you think for this particular business problem, or try to build some rudimentary end-to-end data science application. Because what I'm looking for is like, do you know the technologies that we use in data science? And it's also a good hint of what technologies this particular company is using for. So if they're asking you in the description to use TensorFlow, most likely you got to showcase your TensorFlow skills. If they don't ask for any TensorFlow, just regular data science, then you can use just traditional scikit-learn and those more traditional plugins in itself. But it's where you flex your programming skills and flex your knowledge of the tools data science use on a day-to-day basis. Then after that, you go into a data science interview with a hiring manager. And this is where things can all, again, differ from a lot of companies. And it's one thing I've noticed over time is a lot of companies now are transitioning from a more Q&A based interview process to more case-based interview process. The Q&A interview process, I would say, was very popular 2-3 years ago, and it's still popular, unfortunately. But it's not the best way to test a student or test a new candidate, because you're asking them to memorize every single thing in the data science repertoire, and you're asking them to not refer to any notes at all. And there's just so much to know, and it's not the best assessment. It's more of on that particular day, how confident is the student able to regurgitate a concept? And I'm nervous in the interview process. I could just forget that, but I know it, right? So what I've noticed in the interview process for data scientists is, I would say the leading companies, more progressive companies, are using more case-based questioning. So given a business problem in the context of, say, the company, there's a problem that the hiring manager will lay out, and then the student has to kind of solve that problem with and be able to give it a data science slant of how they would tackle as a data scientist, but also can they tie that to the business problem at the end of the day? If they can show the both of them, then they have a very good shot of actually getting hired. because at the end of the day, what data scientists are problem solvers. But this is in a very generalized role of data science. But if you are looking to become a machine learning specialist or machine learning engineer, that's a little bit different. There's a lot of commonalities, but you're more focused on the software engineering side of really developing the architectures from scratch, developing your custom functions and classes, and your expectations for being able to code is a lot higher than a data scientist. That's my take.
That's a lot. Thanks for sharing all the different type of interviews. So I have questions about the screen test and the take-home challenge and then case interviews. I would start with the screen test, online coding assessment. So 5 years ago, I don't think those type of tests are very popular. So I think it's something emerged recently, especially
definitely
with during the pandemic. Can you tell us what are some tips for people to do this online screen test well? You mentioned look at medium, easy leak code. Are there some other things we need to look at? For example, for data scientists, we use things like pandas, NumPy. How do we prepare those type of online tests?
Well, I mean, these online tests, yeah, you're right. I would say, has emerged in the past year and a half, ever since this pandemic started. It's becoming a lot more popular. And with this coding test, what we've seen is there are those logic problems from leak code that's from easy to medium, or not just for Python, but also for SQL, and maybe some basic statistical problems in that sense. And it could be just multiple choice. Do you know the fundamentals of some statistical equations? But the best way to prepare that is, one, practice your coding abilities, going through the basics. You're not asked to code up generally in these timed online assessments and end-to-end data science model. You're usually just asked to show, can you think through a problem and logically solve that? And I'll give folks some tips. And one thing I've noticed is a lot of students are generally scared of this programming test because it's time, there's so much pressure, but they are confident to solve it. They know they can solve it. And I've heard, this is very anecdotal, but there are some students in the past who are just recent coders. They only learned how to code maybe 3 to 4 months ago, and they're not as experienced as someone who's been coding for 2-3 years, but they know they can solve it. They actually put on their coding test, hey, and they tell the hiring manager as well, I know I can code this, but this pressure of this online test is too much, and I can't code it in a lot of time. But I can write down the pseudocode and write down my logic of how I would solve this because I'm better at thinking that. I'm just a slower coder because I'm new into this field, and that has worked. Hiring managers have looked at the results and realized, okay, that makes sense. This person hasn't been coding for too long. They just graduated from a boot camp or they're self-taught. But their logic, their pseudocode logic actually works, and it makes a lot of sense. And maybe you can't code something in 30 minutes, but you could code in 40 minutes. And that is a strategy that some students have employed to actually get past the first initial screening test, just show the pseudocode. It's our replacement, the online coding test, to just whiteboarding in general. And back in the day when you're whiteboarding on site, you're not really writing the code left and right with all the correct syntax. You're generally writing the pseudocode and the logic. And if you can demonstrate that and demonstrate that you know how a computer thinks and how the computer reads the code to solve whatever challenge you're solving, then the hiring manager will say, okay, this person knows how to code. And hopefully on the job, they'll just pick up their ability to code a lot better. Because data scientists on the end of the day, like I said many times, is problem solvers.
Yeah.
You solve a problem. So that's one tip I would say. And the second thing is just practice your fundamentals and practice coding. And one thing that's I also recommend my students is don't just code data science projects. Try expand your coding repertoire to something completely different. Maybe building an API, or with Flask or with Fast API, or maybe building a web development or like a website from Python. Just expose yourself to different Python toolkits will also expose yourself to how different things are being built and just improves your coding ability in general than just focusing yourself on just one niche coding subject.
Yeah, that's a great advice. Also, that's a pretty inspiring. You mentioned that your mentee talked to the hiring manager.
Yeah.
I think it's another thing during the interview process, we need to feel confident to communicate. Yeah. If you're confident with your skills and you need to tell them what is the best scenario, that what's like the scenario that works best for you, right?
Yeah.
And it's kind of like a two-way thing. You don't just play their game. They also want to hire you. You can tell them, hey, this is what works best for me. How about I show you my way and you can let me know whether you think I'm a good fit, right?
Exactly. And the best hiring managers know that there's different data scientists have their strengths and weaknesses. And a lot of bootcamp students, they probably don't want to become a data scientist who is 100% coder sitting in front of a computer all the time. And they want to have a balance, maybe 50% solving business problem and communicating with stakeholders and 50% coding, and communicate to the hiring manager in the interview process, like what you are looking for, where you can add value. Always leverage your background because all these students have extensive work experience in a different part of their career journey, and communicate where you can add value and how much coding experience you have and how much you want to code. Once you communicate what your ideal balance of coding and problem solving and the business side of data science, a hiring manager will figure out, okay, does this person seem to have a good fit into my current team of data scientists? And you want to have a diverse range of data scientists from different kinds of backgrounds with different abilities so they can all teach each other and improve the team overall. So the best hiring managers will look out for that. But obviously, it does depend on the organization a bit. I would say larger organizations are a bit more flexible because there's a lot more data scientists for them to work on. But initially, for a smaller data science team, they might look for someone who's a lot more programming heavy and want to make sure that person knows how to code a little bit stronger than someone who just writes the pseudocode. Again, obviously, it depends, but that communication to the hiring manager to set the expectation goes a long way. You're just building repertoire and you're showing how you think and how you work, and they can make a better assessment at the end of the day. And part of this interview process is just getting to know the other person. Like, can I work with you? Yes or no? And that's so important. That soft skill is part of the whole experience. The technical interview is also slightly a behavioral interview. It's to show that can we get along? Do I like how you work? Are we communicating in a nice way? That's part of the interview process in general.
Yeah. So can you give us example? For example, if I going to interview with a large company and I'm new to machine learning and I'm also just learn coding for a few months, how do I communicate with the hiring manager to leverage my strengths?
That's a great question. I think we can talk a little bit more like how to get started in the interview process and getting a job. There's two ways of getting a job. There's one, you just kind of blind apply and then hope for the best to get like an interview back, or you kind of network your way in either through a recruiter or through a hiring manager and communicate that you're interested and you want to see if there's any opportunities for the company and yourself to kind of work together. Hiring managers at the end of the day are looking for people who are best fit to the team, and they're looking for people who are competent enough to solve whatever problems or issues that they're having. So the blind apply where you're not really networking doesn't really work too well. It does work to an extent, but the conversion rates are quite low.
Yeah.
So the best way to get ahead of this and really communicate to the team and the hiring manager is to start networking with someone and networking with either the recruiter or the hiring manager. So there's obviously two different strategies for both of these roles. One thing I would always recommend to my students, if you look at a startup company, if it's say 100 to 200 employees or lower, look at the job description, what they're looking for, and look at where this job is located. If it's in Toronto, go to LinkedIn profile of the company, search through the roster of employees and find the person who could potentially be your hiring manager. That could be, VP of data science. That could be a data science senior manager or data science tech lead. Look for those folks who are in leadership positions and reach out to them. And even if you're wrong, they can always refer you to the right person. But reach out to them, be like, hey, I'm interested. But in your message of reaching out to a person, you should describe what your background is, what you're looking for, and what your skill sets are. That's the initial step to have that conversation. Then you send that to the other person. You obviously should apply on the company website too, because surprisingly, even if they don't respond to you on LinkedIn, they see your message and they remember you, so that your chances are also increased when getting the job.
Yeah.
But when you have the initial call with them, actually talking to them one-on-one, you should communicate that what your strengths are, what you're looking for, and really be clear with them. If you don't show your strengths or weaknesses, and you don't communicate like what you're clearly looking for, then you haven't showed much confidence in your own abilities, and the hiring manager might look for another candidate. The best folks who get hired are folks who are very focused on what they're looking for, and they communicate that. And it's much easier for both parties. One, to tell you up front, hey, we're not really looking for that, but maybe I can refer you to someone else that I know might be looking for that. So once again, you're also just building relationships in this interview process. You want to be cordial, you want to be positive, you want to communicate your professionalism, and just build that repertoire. And even if you have rejection, that's totally okay. Because if you had a good interview process, they still remember you. They still, this candidate was pretty good. I would work with this person, but unfortunately we're not a best fit, but I could refer this person to another person. So in the interview process, yes, communicate what you're looking for, your strengths and weaknesses, and what skills you want to grow or learn more, and what you want to achieve. And then number two, also communicate your professionalism and then build a repertoire and try to build that professional relationship, because that will go a long way into your job hunt. Rejection can lead to acceptance somewhere else.
Yeah, I love that. I think when we look for a job, especially, I remember when I just graduated, I don't know what I was looking for. I applied for everything. And also I feel I was scared of telling people what I was looking for, because I worry if they're looking for someone else, they will reject me. I think that's because I didn't have that confidence. So I want to pretend I want to be everything. Although you might get some rejection because your interests are not aligned with the hiring manager, but it's actually easier for you to get hired in a role that you actually very interested in, right? Yeah. So I encourage job seekers to really think about what are you interested in, what type of roles are you looking for. But for someone who just got into data science or want to transition to data science, what if I don't know what's good for me? Maybe I want to do product analytics. I don't want to do too much machine learning, or should I do machine learning that also looks cool? How do I find out what's good for me?
That's a great question. And you're right. Initially, when you are, you just graduate from a boot camp, you ask yourself, do I really want to get into data science? Because there's some folks who go through this boot camp just to get the fundamental data science, like what is AI? How does it work? How are these machine learning applications being built? But they're actually not looking to become a data scientist. They might have tons of experienced work, let's say 10 years under their belt, and they probably want to look for a product manager role in a data science oriented company, or a company that's very data forward. You got to ask yourself first, like, what are you looking for? But the second thing I always tell my students is everyone in this boot camp, they, at least in the boot camps I work with, they usually come with some history of work experience. That could be from in the oil and gas industry. They might be there for 5-10 years. They might come from the restaurant industry or come from the marketing industry. They come from all kinds of backgrounds, or just some engineering background. I would say leverage what you know in the past. So if you come from oil and gas, look into your domain and try to figure out where are some machine learning problems or data science problems or problems you can solve with a data science application. So look into your past and see where you can add value, because domain expertise is so important in the data science realm. And you already have that leg up by having that experience in that world for some time before you try to dive into data science, and then start networking with people into this different data science roles in your industry that you have previous experience in. That's one of the easiest ways for someone with a lot of domain knowledge to break into data science, is looking into their past. And the second thing is just talking to all kinds of people and just networking with folks, and just to understand, like, what do they do? You talk to someone who's a data scientist at Amazon and understand, like, how do they work? What do they do? What they're trying to solve? Talk to someone at a smaller startup that's just starting out and ask them, like, what do they do? Like, how are they trying to solve problems? Initially, you have to spend some time doing your research, but the best way to do research is through networking. And when you are networking, try not to network too much in terms of, I want you to refer me for the job, but try to network in an idea of, like, creating this professional relationship. Try to understand, like, what they're looking for, but also try to understand, like, what do they do? And people love talking about themselves. That's one thing I've learned, and I think I tell everyone, is people love to talk about their work, their journey, what they're doing. And if you can get the other person to talk about that, then you can understand a little bit more about their role. So starting build networks and build up professional relationships with all kinds of folks is a good way to understand what the role is, or the type of role you might be looking for, and it can help narrow down your search. So initially, I don't recommend just jump into job search, apply for all the jobs when you graduate. Spend some time understanding what you're looking for and what roles you're looking for, and networking is the best way to do that.
Yeah. That's a great advice. And going back to interviews, so you also mentioned the take-home challenge. So what are some tips to do well in take-home challenge?
Take-home challenges, it really varies from a lot of companies. I don't see two the same. There's some take-home challenges where they don't expect you to spend too much time. Just say spend 2 to 4 hours. There's some take-home challenges where they expect you to spend 8 hours to even 2 days. So I would say take-home, I'm not the biggest fan of some take-home challenges, because some take-home challenges, they're asking the other person to do work for the company and it's unpaid. And that's, I wouldn't say is very cool. And it's also a red flag, in my opinion, if they ask the candidate to spend so much time building an end-to-end machine learning model. But the smaller take-home challenges where you're not spending too much effort, maybe 2 to 6 hours, those are pretty good take-home challenges. And the best thing you want to do in take-home challenge is constantly communicate your work. So either build like a README file when you submit your work that tells the other person what to look for first, what did you do, your key struggles, what problems you encountered, and what you're trying to solve. Communicate clearly in either a README file or a document what you've done and what you're trying to achieve, and how long it took to solve this problem. And in your code in itself, it could be a Jupyter notebook, it just could be some Python scripts. Clearly document every single thing that you're doing, and clearly write your code, because when they're looking at this, they want to read it from top to bottom in an easy, succinct way that doesn't have to have them spend too much time figuring out, like, what is this person trying to do? They want to understand what you did quickly, and they're not spending a lot of time looking at your work. So communicating with a nice file or communicating your impact or the results is always a bonus point, and it takes your application further, because communication is so important in the data science world, also in the coding world in general. Because if you write code and you have no code comments and no documentation, you give it to me and I spend too much time trying to figure out your work, you're just wasting my time. So make my life easier, make the hiring manager easier by communicating your work and openly think about your thought process. So in a case, for example, in a one-on-one interview where you're answering a case question, part of that case answer is you're kind of thinking out loud for the hiring manager to see like how you're thinking. Apply that concept, but in written form in your take-home assessment is what I'm suggesting.
Yeah. And previously you mentioned any technical interview, it looks like even the take-home challenge is also a behavior interview. People want to see whether they like your thought process, your work style. So can you tell us more about how do you improve your communication skills and soft skills during this interview process?
Yeah, communication and soft skills it's very hard to teach. I have to admit, it's very hard to kind of communicate that properly. And it really depends on what are those soft skills. If it's work and it's in a written form, part of that is just building that habit of, and it's something that we always teach, I teach my students, is when you're working on a project, it could be a mini project, it could be a portfolio project, communicate your work, have a beautiful README, have a beautiful repo on GitHub, and your code comments, use markdown cells on Jupyter that are there for a reason. Use it as much as you can, and building that habit of communicating and explaining your work. If you have the habit initially, then it would be much easier for you to have the habit in your take-home assessment. So in your take-home assessment, also just before you submit, refactor your code, beautify it a little bit to kind of show your thought process. It's always okay to overly communicate your ideas and overly communicate your thought process because you want to show the other person as much how you're communicating. And when it comes to soft skills in the interview process, I mean, there's a lot of different things that can communicate that. A few things I suggest is don't try to answer a question right away. If you're just constantly jumping left and right after a question, you're not really stopping to think, and you might not give the best answer. Take a moment to think. That's totally okay. 30 seconds, a minute, have like a notebook down and to jot down some agenda you want to say. You can always repeat the question to the interviewer, because sometimes, especially over Zoom these days, there could be connection issues. I might not hear your question properly. So repeating the question shows that you're trying to listen. And if I repeat it wrong, the hiring manager can correct them myself. And always, for case-based question, always ask questions. Always ask more questions about the scenario. Get more detail as much as you can, because you want the big picture. And then openly communicate your assumptions and openly communicate your thought process. And it's okay if you make a mistake in your thought process and you kind of realize it in your conversation. Just mention that, because some people do think out loud very clearly, and it really depends on the culture in itself. Some cultures do normally just think out loud, and when they communicate and refining their ideas, they're just thinking out loud, having conversation with other person. And this is something I definitely realized when I lived in Quebec. The Quebec population and people, they think out loud very freely. And that's something I've adopted, is I think out loud a lot. But yeah, soft skills, it's hard to teach, but it's just a few little things that can enhance those soft skills, communication abilities, such as take your time, ask some questions, repeat the question back. Also, when explaining things, if you try to use examples or use cases to tie into your concept, that takes your explanation to the next level. You're not just regurgitating a definition. You're trying to put some context to that explanation. And it's always more fun for the hiring manager, because it's easier for me to kind of leverage on that conversation, have a deeper conversation. One exercise I tell my students, and I think I copied this from a YouTube video. I forgot where the channel, but there's like this video series of an expert on a subject trying to explain a concept to like a child, teenager, college kid,
I've seen that. Like, how do you
adult.
explain machine learning to a
Yeah,
child or like subject matter expert?
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Take that exercise and actually practice that. Try
Mm.
to explain a concept to a child, to a teenager, to a college kid, or to like a subject expert, machine learning or something. In that practice, you'll realize where are your knowledge gaps. If you can't simplify a subject to the simplest thing or a simplest explanation, then it kind of shows or suggests that you don't have a full grasp on it. The best teachers at the end of the day are those who are able to explain things in simple layman terms for someone to get. If they're using a lot of jargon, then the other person who doesn't have that knowledge of jargon will get confused. So break down complex ideas into simple terms that's understandable goes a long way, because you're not just working with data scientists at the end of the day, you're working with non-technical stakeholders. So if you can communicate your work and your ideas to a non-technical audience, that goes a long way.
Yeah,
well.
I think that's a very important skill to practice. Maybe you can just practice explain some difficult concept to your friends, your family. Yeah. So when you mentor students, I think, what are some mistakes they made during their job search process?
I would say some of the mistakes they do make is they don't network enough. I think that's one commonality. Is the best students I see who got a job pretty quickly after they graduated, say a month or 2 months after they graduated, the best students networked from day one.
Yeah.
They networked a lot to get a lot of information and start that process really quickly. If you don't network, your chances of getting an interview is not very high. And the second thing besides networking is also refining your storytelling abilities. Can you tell your story? Like, who are you? Like, what are you doing here? Why are you transitioning into data science? Like, what is your motivation? Do your best to practice that story and communicate that, because we all love a good story.
Yeah.
And the other thing that I find a lot of students fail to do, and which slows down their job hunts, is not joining a community or a data science community to kind of be around data science folks and be exposed to different data science applications. So that could be joining an online Slack channel or community that's data science specific, AI specific, that have a lot of meetups, or it could be your local chapter of data science professionals. Find a community of data science folks and attend to these communities. It doesn't have to be a community, it could be a conference in itself. This really takes your confidence to the next level. If you go to a conference and they're presenting, it's a data science presentation, and you are actually understanding 90% of what they're saying, and you tell yourself, damn, I actually understood what they're doing. That makes a lot of sense. That builds your confidence to the next level. It validates what you have been doing for the past 3 to 4 months, trying to learn this role, learn data science. And when you expose yourself to different data science ideas, then you can communicate that to your hiring manager through the interview process, or talk data science with people. If you can talk data science with people, that's good practice for that soft skills and that communication. So joining a community is vital. And the next thing is not spending enough time on SQL. This is an unlikely thing, but SQL is so important in the industry to know how to query data. No one's going to query your data for you. You got to query your own data. So working with SQL and refining that it's an often overlooked skill set in the data science realm, or at least someone who's a new student in the data science realm, is making sure you brush up on your SQL, and making sure you're also constantly building some portfolio project. You don't have to build 4 to 5 or 6 portfolio projects. You can build 2 or 3 super solid, long portfolio projects, and don't look at Google's top 10 list of top portfolio projects. Try to be creative. Try to find something unique and interesting that either you're passionate about or you have domain expertise. I'll tell you one project that I thought was so funny, that that a student definitely got a job afterwards, and he does credit this. But one of his projects was this before pandemic. He used to drive into the city of Toronto all the time. He lived in the suburbs and he drove in the city of Toronto for work and whatnot. Every day would commute to the city, and he used to get parking tickets all the time because he forgot to pay his parking. And most cities have an open data portal of variety of data that the city gives. And what he did was he got the history of parking tickets in the city of Toronto on the various intersections, the exact time, what day, and whatnot. And he analyzed that and created a simple model that gave him a risk factor of at this particular day and time, what is the likelihood of I'm getting a parking officer to come to this street and actually give me a ticket. So it was his way to kind of avoid parking officers by analyzing data, but it communicates a use case, an application that's useful to some people. And he was passionate about it. It was funny, and it got him a job. It was really unique. Another example I thought was really cool, and I want to highlight this. At the end of the day, these portfolio projects needs to communicate some unique business application or use case that someone else can understand the value of it. If it's just a simple, let me classify a flower, it's not going to go too far. You want something a bit unique that normally people don't see. This other story is during the pandemic. This student, he was interested in traffic collisions in the city of Toronto. So he went to the open data portal in the city of Toronto and got the history of data of all different traffic collisions in the various intersections at the different times of day in the past few years. So it took, I would say, the last 2 years, and he did a lot of feature engineering. He got the weather data, he got the sun data. So if you're driving southbound or westbound, like what at that day, is the sun in your eyes or not? He took that extra step of thinking all the different feature engineering skills and ideas that could potentially, lead to a car collision. Like, what is an incident of a car collision? And then his goal was, okay, I want to be able to give a risk score on this particular intersection at this particular time interval. Will there be likely a collision? Yes or no? And his business application was this. The city of Toronto at that time announced that, they were going to release, or there's a new budget for traffic enforcement officers in the city because collision rates have been going up over the past few years for some reason. So they want to put traffic officers at certain intersections to reduce collision. Yeah. And his idea, okay, if I can get a machine learning model that can help the Toronto police force learn or figure out where to best place their officers, that's a win-win situation. And that was his business case, is to help the police force figure out where to best place their officers, because they just released the budget for new traffic collision officers. And I thought that was a genius application because it's definitely very unique and there's a clear business value or community value in that sense. So when you're building your portfolio projects, think outside the box. Don't use Google. Look at weird data sets or interesting data sets that you may not think about, and be inspired by that. And usually all these major cities have open data portals around the world. I know New York has one, Vancouver has one. Go through that and be inspired of what you can think and try to solve some community problem if you can. And that will go a long way, because if there's a clear use case and you communicate that to the hiring manager, they'll be interested in your story even more.
Yeah, I love the story, because I think a lot of people, when they think about building project, they use the most popular Kaggle data set, which the hiring manager probably have seen 1,000 times. Yeah. So what is something unique to you? It doesn't have to be super complicated. Maybe through some data aggregation, visualization, you can already tell a good story. Mm-hmm. And I think 2 data sets I previously looked at for my own portfolio project. One, I used US Census data. They publish a lot of data, right? How people spend their time, what's their salary, some safety score for, in some city, because that's interesting to me. I want to know how do I pick a good city to live in? So I look at those data. That was quite interesting. Another one is exactly you mentioned. Cities have those community data. I remember when I lived in Seattle, there was also the time when people call like 911. Also a lot of like parking lot, those location related data. And I've seen people create a very cool map mapping those, accidents or, parking, open spaces. So I think it's very important to be creative and pick someone you're interested in, and also think about what is the impact of this project. And then always put it out there. Put it on Medium, put it on GitHub. Nobody knows what you did if you just put it on some, local script and
share your work to as many people as you can. Use LinkedIn, use Twitter, Medium, all that. It's very important as well, just to share your work. And if you're also applying for a job, you can also just quickly just share the link to the GitHub repo of this latest project you're building, so they can quickly click on it and realize, oh, this is great. And if you have a beautiful README with a beautiful layout, it even goes even further. Another thing is you could do is, if you make your application interactive, where someone can actually play around with your work and actually has a user interface that can see what you did, that goes a long way as well. That could be a dashboard, or that could be like a Streamlit application where you have like your proof of concept, your portfolio project there, and someone can just play around with that. That goes a lot further as well. You're thoughtful about the you're being mindful about the user of this project at the end of the day.
Yeah. So what are some tips for people who do remote interviews, or like in general, now we're all doing interviews, job search during the pandemic. What are some of your best advice?
You have to be comfortable. Just be yourself. I would say ever since the pandemic started, I remember the first 3 months to 4 months, it was weird. Like working with a colleague over Zoom, it was not as fully natural when you're collaborating and it's through Zoom compared to like in person. That took some time to get used to, but I do think now for many folks, people are quite comfortable over Zoom. They just be themselves, they communicate naturally, they can joke around, and at the end of the day, just be yourself is what you need to do. Like, try to relax, try not to be stressed out too much. Just break the ice if you can. If you break the ice within the first 5 minutes, then you relax throughout the whole presentation or the whole interview process. I mean, there's a lot of tips and tricks here. Like when it comes to like dressing your part, research the company. Are they a more formalized company? Or are they more relaxed, startup-y vibe? If you can research the culture, you can kind of dress the part for the company's role. But once again, maybe that's part of your decision-making process. Do I want a casual company, or do you want a company that's a bit more formalized or a bit more corporate in their day-to-day workflow? But just be yourself, be professional. If you can joke around, go ahead. I would say show your personality as much as you can and not try to hide that and just be too professional. It's okay. We're at home these days. And I definitely do think in today's world, people are okay to be silly a little bit and relax a little bit and show their personality compared to 20, 30 years ago where you might have to be super professional. At least that's what I've seen. And that's what I look for when I'm communicating with professionals is I just be myself.
Yeah. And you mentioned breaking the ice in the first 5 minutes. So how do you break the ice?
That's a great question. I usually go to sports.
Okay.
Personally, I usually talk about sports. At least in North America, I find there's a good chance people are into sports here. If I'm in Toronto, there's a good chance people are a big fan of the Toronto Raptors. If someone is based in LA, there's a good chance they're talking about the LA Lakers. So if you're just knowledgeable of one league, that's totally okay. That's one thing you can try to bring up, sports. It usually breaks the ice, but obviously not everyone knows sports. I know some people are not really into it.
You're right.
So it's totally okay to do that. So breaking the ice, people usually talk about their weekends or how are you, or I find people always mention the weather these days. It's always funny if I'm in Canada and you're in the States, people always say, "Oh, is it cold up there?" And you just make a joke, ha ha ha. But that's very hard to like answer that question properly. I think it just requires being comfortable with yourself and just
Yeah.
going for like a few jokes.
Hmm.
Or what do you do when you talk to a colleague? That cooler talk that you have normally, just use the same thing in your interview process. Cooler talk or your talk that you have in the break room, that is just normal talk that people have. Maybe talk about the latest movie you watched.
Hmm.
There's definitely a lot of different things that you can mention. But I would say sports is a big one. If you're into that, that's always a safe bet. There's at least 30% chance they can talk about the sports topic like
Yeah.
briefly. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. Thanks for sharing that. Well, I know nothing about sports. I guess I need to prepare some weather jokes.
Yeah, you can make some weather jokes. Yeah.
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 And I think it's okay if you don't have any jokes. I think the key here
Yeah.
is to be relaxed. You can
Yeah.
only be yourself if you are relaxed and then,
Yeah.
enjoy the conversation. And also, when we tend to be nervous, we talk very
Hmm.
fast. We try
Yeah.
to jump into the answer. So just
Yeah.
have the
Slow down.
awareness, right? Slow down. It shows confidence. It also
Mhm.
gives you a little bit more time for you to think through the problems.
Yeah. Slowing down is a very important tip. I definitely agree there. Take your time.
Mm,
Just breathe and don't answer right away. Like you're right. If you answer right away and you talk very fast, then you are nervous. So catch yourself and slow down. But it's understandable. Like the first one or two interviews you ever get, you're most likely not going to do too well on them
yeah.
because this is your first experience of what a data science interview is, and it's scary. They ask you a concept and you just blank out. The first two interviews for most people are just throwaway interviews, but going through the first two usually you get an idea what the interview process is and you can relax. I would say I agree. The key is in the first 5 minutes. If you can break the ice and slow down, and then you kind of settle into this interview process, and the rest of the interview it should go smoothly. And yeah, slowing down is very helpful.
Hmm. And you mentioned if you just have your first or second interview, you're going to get
Yeah,
rejection. So maybe some people might get rejected for multiple companies. So how I want to talk about their mindset. So how can they shift their mindset to keep going while experience those rejections? Could be, sad,
yeah.
frustrated.
The data science interview process is hard. It is so hard to get a data science job um, because it's such a broad topic and such a deep topic at the end of the day. Like usually where the main point of where people fail is usually the technical interview,
Mm,
especially initially when you have very little experience and you haven't been exposed to this. But you have to treat each rejection as an opportunity of like what you did and what you didn't do well. If you notice in your interview process that you totally forgot how to explain what a k-means algorithm is or what unsupervised learning is, then it's highlights that you kind of forgot that. So take note of each interview and improve on it or spend some time to brush up on that because that's just the weak point. So an interview process is always a reflection opportunity for you to figure out where you can improve. But the number two thing I would suggest is always ask for feedback if you can.
mm,
Not every hiring manager will give you feedback,
yeah.
unfortunately, but always mention that you want some feedback and they will some of them will give you feedback. And number three, um, always give them a warm response or a warm rejection letter if you can. Be like, oh, thank you for this opportunity. I really appreciate that. If you can personalize it a little bit and maybe ask a one or two follow-up questions, they're most likely to respond. So personalizing your rejection response is very helpful. Don't just stop at the rejection letter. Actually reach out and respond to them because one, you'll stand out. Number two, it's an opportunity for you to actually build a professional relationship. If you can actually build a professional relationship, even though you got the rejection, that's a win-win for you because one, that's a network that you can use or talk to somewhere down the line, or that's a referral that you could use later on in the process. Or introduction to another data scientist or another data science hiring manager at a different company. So treat your rejection as an opportunity to build upon for your actual data science job. So you kind of have to have the growth mindset of a glass half full instead of a glass half empty.
Yeah.
And just be positive. And I understand after a few rejection, it's hard. It's demotivating, right? You kind of start questioning yourself.
Yeah.
But one thing you can look at is look at your skill set in rejection number 10 and how you handle the interview, and look at your skill set, say in rejection number 5, or even just maybe not by that metric, but just look at yourself today and look at yourself a month ago or 2 months ago, or maybe 2-week intervals, and ask yourself, am I improving? Am I getting better at this? Have I built a network?
Yeah.
And if it's yes, you expand your network, great. That's a success metric. If your skill sets in interviewing and your interviewing process, you feel like you did a better job, that's great. You've improved your interviewing skills. If your coding skills and your project skills becomes better and you find coding much easier, that's another success metric. You are constantly improving. So you have to keep your head high and keep on going and spend some time reflecting on each rejection and figure out where to improve that, and also take the opportunity to change a rejection to an opportunity for you to build a actual solid network moving forward.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, like one of the best investments you can make is in your network. Build as many connections as you can, and add value to your network. Then later on the line, that network can help you out when you need to.
Yeah. So I think a lot of times when we get a rejection email, we just think that door is closed.
Yeah.
But what you suggest is to, focusing on building the relationship. Maybe that door will open someday, and then you can build multiple relationships. And also previously you mentioned have a community. You can get support from each other people's success story can also motivate you. When I read your intro, there was you mentioned you help job seekers to find out of the box ideas. Can you share a few of your favorite out of the box ideas for job searching?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these out of box ideas, I would say just trying to break the general notion of what job hunting is, because in school or in society, we tell people, okay, send out your resume to 300 different applications and hope for the best. Hopefully maybe 10 of them responds. But that's not always true. What I've learned and what I've seen as well is like the best students who get a job really tailor their application or really tailor their job hunt on very few and specific roles that they really want to get. So they identify 5-10 companies that they're so interested in and spend a lot more effort on each application. So instead of low effort mass application, high effort with a smaller section of application, spend time networking with those people, reaching out to the recruiter, hiring manager, trying to understand like what they're looking for and trying to communicate that. So that's one thing I would suggest is like spend your time networking. The next thing I would say out of the box idea is look into your community of like where you can add some value from a data science point of view. For example, if you just finish your data science bootcamp and you have some data analytics chops, try to go to your local restaurants and see if they have any data where you can analyze and give them a free report. Or it could be a nicer restaurant and see if you can analyze some data for them. Say which menus or menu items are most popular, whatnot. It's to build your business sense. It's also to build your network. And it tells the hiring manager, oh, you actually went out there and actually did some real analytics work or some real recommendations for folks. So if you can do that, that's always a great sign at the end of the day. But a lot of the out of the box ideas also is if you're working with or you're trying to get into a startup, one thing you can do is reach out to the founder right away. If it's like a startup that's less than 100 folks, it's totally okay to reach out to the founder and send out a nice cold email. Cold emailing does work, and there's a few strategies on how to cold email. So one strategy to figure out like what is the email the CEO, it's usually a combination of four emails. It's usually first name at company.com, or first name last name at company.com, or like say my name is Andrew Barry, a.barry@company.com. There's only a few combinations, so you can just like kind of guess what it is. Put that all in your what you call it, your to line on the on your email client, and just write a cold email to them. And you can also double check, because there's probably email aggregators out online where you can actually try to find the actual person to email. So do that cold email. And in that cold email, you have to write something a bit warm. Show that you're interested, show your credibility, like what you're looking for, what skills you add, and kind of showcase how to add value, and show or do something a bit extra to communicate that you think you're a good fit at this company. So if it's a startup, communicate that you're a hustler or you believe in one of their values, and maybe give an example of where you hustled. Like, you want to show that you can add value right away, because they look at this email and their response has to be considered in less than 20 seconds. Is yes or no? Am I going to forward this email to someone else who can hire this person or not? So actually reaching out to founders is a really good opportunity to get your conversion rates to the next level. And I know folks who did that usually at least get an interview process started above 50% conversion rate. So reaching out to founders does help a lot. If you don't want to reach out to founders, reach out to the VP of data science, or who is in a leadership position in whatever field that you're looking for, and don't hesitate to follow up. So following up is really important. Follow up 2 to 3 times afterwards also increases your conversion rate, not just on emailing, but also through LinkedIn as well. Just having a quick follow-up, if it's like 24 hours later or 48 hours later, does go a long way. And when you follow up, they're more likely to respond to your email afterwards. So don't hesitate to do that. It shows that you are eager and shows that you want to have a conversation with other person, and you are a hustler, and that goes a long way for at least for smaller companies and startups, that they want people who believe in them. A larger organization, you can still employ the same strategy. It just reach out to these folks and actually follow up. The follow up actually works. I know you and I had that one course the other day, I think over the summer, where we were taught how to follow up, and that skill set is something I've definitely told to my students, and actually employed myself to actually build some more networks, and it does work. So following up does go a long way as well.
Yeah. So sometimes it's not people doesn't like you, or don't want to talk to you. Sometimes people are busy, they forget. So
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, first time you message them, maybe 20% will reply, but when you follow up, maybe you get 80% response. So, but you don't have to follow up like every day. So maybe wait a few days, a few weeks. You want to show your passion, but you don't also want to seem like you are harassing them.
Yeah, obviously there is a fine balance.
Yeah.
That fine balance is something you have to figure out yourself. But there is I would say, so respond within the first 2 days, a follow up, and then maybe another one in a week's time. And you can leave it at that. Maybe after 3 or 4 follow-ups, you should question yourself: am I harassing this person or not? Or am I just being ignored here? Just take 2 to 3, and the last follow-up could be, this is my last follow-up. If not, I won't bother anymore. And the last follow-up, they'll read that, they'll accept that, and like, okay, cool, this person has stopped. Because I've on LinkedIn and on my email, I always get folks or salespeople who are reaching out to you, and they follow up after like 7-8 times, and they know I've ignored them for 7-8 times, and it gets annoying. So don't be a salesperson who's trying to get a sale. You're building a professional network. You don't want to annoy the other person. You want to be respectful of their boundaries. But I think that is something you kind of have to figure out yourself, and what those boundaries are.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. I think exactly like you mentioned, we are so used to the norm. You apply for some online position and wait for the recruiters to call you. But there are a lot of invisible possibilities out there, the invisible networks that you can be proactive, reach out to not just the recruiters, right? But if it's smaller company, the CEO, the VP, the hiring manager, and you can own this job search game, and you can control the tempo. You can talk to whoever you want to talk to, because what's the danger of not getting a response, right? There's no downside of that. I think the first time, and the first time I remember when I sent a cold email, I don't know why, I just feel so scared. It's like, if this person doesn't respond, and then it might make me feel hurt, but I think once I overcome that, I would just, I'm just going to send a message, and it's okay if they don't respond.
It is totally okay. Just don't take it personally.
Yeah.
And you're right. It gets scary at first. It's outside your comfort zone. It's not something you've done, but once you start that ball moving forward, then it becomes easier and becomes easier and easier. And you just become a pro at using your invisible networks. Like you said, it's like controlling the tempo of your job hunt and really going niche, like what you're looking for. Besides the cold emailing, if you join a data science community, that's always a good opportunity to leverage that network as much as you can. So if you have a mutual connection, find that mutual connection and be like, hey, buddy, do you mind introducing me to the other person? And I'm a big believer of doing introductions, because my philosophy when it comes to networking is I always try to add as much value to my network more than just taking out of it, because the more value I add to it in the future, later down the line, when I need to take something out of my network, they're more likely to reciprocate that favor. So that's the mindset I always get. Even if you're job hunting, try to add value somewhere. And if you know someone who's also job hunting that could be a better fit, it's totally okay that you can refer to your friend for this job. Try to be, pragmatic. Try to think of like, am I a good fit in this company? Yes or no? And see where you can best serve the community or best serve your network. If you have that mindset, then you can have a good job of like finding a job there down the line. Or even when you switch, if you want to switch a job 2-3 years down the line, since you've always added value and you always support your network, you'll be rewarded.
Yeah. And you mentioned finding a data science community. Do you have some recommendation for like a Slack channel, Discord?
The first thing I would look for is your local community that is popular. So go into meetups.com, you find like a local community, or go to Eventbrite and see if there's a local data science conference. Well, these days it doesn't have to be local. If it's in your region, that'd be great. If you're in Silicon Valley, just find your local Silicon Valley data science conference. If you're in Toronto, look for that local Toronto data science /AI conference. That's always a great place to start. There's one community that I really recommend. It's called Aggregate Intellect. It's based out of Toronto, but they have community, I think, all over North America, like Toronto, New York, Silicon Valley. And that's a really active Slack channel with a lot of open source projects. And you can just participate in this open source project. And it's a good way to actually have open source projects on your portfolio, is to join Aggregate Intellect, join these open source projects and see where you can add value. That's always a great way to build that network. And Aggregate Intellect is the one big professional network of data scientists that I know is generally pretty active and very supportive. And it's a great community. And I recommend that network to all my students who I work with.
Yeah. So now after we get a job, there's the salary negotiation process. And to a lot of people, it's a new experience, especially when someone's eager to find a job. They also feel sometimes they don't deserve a higher salary. So what is your best advice for salary negotiation?
I would say you got to do your research of like, what is this city's average salaries for a data scientist? But you should also use your background. If you have 10 years of experience, you deserve someone who gets a salary who within 10 years of experience, because you have so much domain knowledge, you have so much soft skills that you can add value.
Yeah.
You have credible working experience. So don't shadow that or overshadow that. Like, use your professional experience to be part of your interview process. And whenever you get the first salary offer, always negotiate a higher offer. Because most likely they will try to renegotiate that, because they spent so much money trying to figure out if this person is the right candidate. Hiring is so expensive from the other side. So they're always more than willing to renegotiate your salary to be higher. So always renegotiate. And at least in the data science realm, since there is a huge shortage of data scientists around the world, I remember reading the statistic, at least in Canada. This is, I would say, it's an old statistic. It's like a year ago. But in Canada, there was a study by EY, the big four companies, that said that in Canada alone, there was 100,000 data professional shortage in Canada alone. But that's just in data analytics, data science, data engineering, the whole realm of data. But it shows that there's a massive shortage. And I'm sure in the States, it's a huge, massive shortage of data science professionals. So after you get that first job, it's so much easier to get the second job afterwards, because you have at least 1 year of experience under your belt, and you can move forward. So if it's okay if your first salary might not be the best, it ramps up pretty quickly, the salaries and packages you get after the first year. So optimize for learning initially, but also don't hesitate to renegotiate at a higher rate, and use your background and use your past working experience to say, hey, I can bring this, and I can bring this expertise in leadership. I know I can add value, and just be confident in that. And if they say no, then you can either accept their offer or not, but it's always worth trying. And folks who do try generally do get a higher offer. So always renegotiate a higher rate after the first offer is what I would recommend.
Yeah, because when people give you the first offer, they leave room for negotiation.
Yeah. They know that you want to renegotiate. So it's always a good sign on your end too, on their end, to see that you are willing to renegotiate. You're not taking their lowball offer. Mm-hmm. You want, you know what you're worth, and they're more than willing to give you a better offer after that reply.
Yeah. And when people get an offer from a startup or big company, usually the structure is different. Small startups sometimes give more equity. So how should candidates decide whether they want to work for a startup or big company? What's your take on that? Also, different opportunities, right? Startup might fail, but big companies, you might be tied down to a very specific role, less flexibility. It's from a salary and a job experience perspective. What do you think about those two type of roles?
I think at the end of the day, it really comes down to what are your priorities in life at the end of the day? Like, do you want something a little bit more stable that's very high paying? Usually these big companies, these corporations do pay a good rate. Salaries at a startup generally aren't as high as that at a larger organization. So that's something you have to keep in mind, but you do have the potential upside because you get some equity at these smaller companies. But you're right, it really depends, because that startup might fail. So there's a lot of considerations you should have when getting into a startup. It's like, are the founders have a good track record? Is there a good team? Has there been recent funding? Who are like the leading VCs of this company? There's a lot of factors you have to consider, but one thing you have to keep in mind, if you are younger and you have less invisible handcuffs, what I mean by that is you have a mortgage or you have a family to take care of, then you can afford to take the risk and join a startup, because you learn so much so quickly. And if you focus on the idea of optimizing for learning and experience, then startups might be the way to go, because after a year or two, that's great experience that you can leverage to get your next job. So initially, for a new data scientist, I wouldn't say that should be too big of a consideration within your first job, because after 1 year of experience or 1.5 years of experience under your belt, the doors and opportunities for more data science position opens up exponentially. There's a lot more opportunities for you to jump into a more, say, corporate role if you would like to get that corporate role. So initially, optimize for learning and experience is what I would say. But choosing between corporation and startups, a lot of it is just personal preference, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
What's your take on that?
Yeah. So I think I agree with you. It really depends on the personal preference.
Yeah.
Because I started in a medium-sized company, so I don't know what it's like to work for a startup, but I was the only data analyst, data scientist there. So I get to work on both reporting and some research. I work with marketing. I work with data engineers. I think I learned how the entire business work, and then you have to learn a lot of communication skills. So I think that experience definitely helpful. And working for a large company with Amazon, I think the benefit is we're encouraged to move across different teams. Yeah. So I have been, including my current team, this is my 4th team. And each team is so different. You, on the high level, you work for the same company, but you literally feels like you're working for some different companies. Your manager's style is different. The business unit is different. So I think you can also learn a lot from a large company. And then you also have a larger community. You can learn from a lot of very smart people. There's very established mentorship programs. I think I see a path I see a lot of people do is they start with large companies, work for a few years. Once they have learned a lot of things, they move to medium-sized or smaller companies where they feel they can bring more impact to really help a business grow. And then maybe, they want to start their own company, or they can become a, VP of the startup, and the startup may one day again become a big company. But I don't think there's a right and wrong. It doesn't matter where you start right now. Our life is always give us unexpected surprises. Yeah. So I think it's just good to every once a few years, you can ask yourself, hey, am I happy? Am I growing? Should I go look around? And I don't think this interviewing skill is just for someone who finished a boot camp or graduate from school. The interview landscape is constantly changing. So it's good to see what's out there. Maybe just get an interview to see what questions people are asking these days. And maybe you get an offer, you realize, you need to ask for a raise.
Yep. I agree. Always say yes to an interview offer. It's always good practice. If a recruiter reaches out to you and like, hey, we want to see if you're a good fit, say yes to that. There's no downside. You can always say no. Even if you don't think you want to get the job, you are happy in your role, it's always good practice. And you can be surprised. They might give you an awesome offer and it's a really cool opportunity. And maybe that will take your life to the next level. And I do agree. In today's world, you're not like careers are so dynamic these days. You can work from a large organization to a small organization. You go up and down, sideways. Folks who are not traditional data scientists becomes data scientists and they get out of data science. It's not like 30 years ago, 40 years ago, you're stuck in one company and you stay there for the rest of your life. You can move around, and people generally these days move around after 2-3 years to get a better offer. And at least most of my colleagues and friends in this city, at least folks who are in their 20s, they generally move around quite a lot after 1 or 2 years because they're optimizing for experience and exposure, and they want new opportunities or new things that are exciting. And I think that's totally okay. And society has said that is totally okay. And people are encouraged to do that.
Yeah. So previously you mentioned that you observed a shift in data science interview process. You see more this online coding assessment, more take-home challenges, and also from the live interviews shifting from Q&A to a case-based interview question. So what are some other things that you think are changing today in the process?
In the process, definitely the interview process has switched. But one thing I definitely realized as well, and I think a lot of folks have realized this, is the data science world is becoming a little bit more defined. 2, 3 years ago, the term data scientist was very broad. No one really knew what it was. A lot of recruiters don't understand what data science is. You look at some job description and they're asking for like a very full stack data scientist. And that's very scary for a lot of folks who don't have that much experience or don't know every single toolkit in this job posting. So these days I've noticed more companies are becoming aware of what data scientists are, and they're problem solvers at the end of the day. And if they're looking for data scientists, they'll be very clear they're looking for a problem solver, and the job role in descriptions is very clearly defined. If they're looking for a machine learning engineer, they will say that a machine learning engineer. So the roles have become more defined and better understood for the differences of the different roles in data science. Because sometimes there's some data science roles and basically it's a data engineer that they're looking for, but the recruiter or the company hasn't caught up to understand like what that role is. So it's, again, these days, if you see a job posting that the role looks asking for too much, it's usually a red flag, I would say. And you want to look at some of the other companies where the roles are more clearly defined and they're not asking for very heavy experience. They know what they're looking for. And that's where you can find great companies to work for. So that's one thing I've noticed is there is a maturing of the industry and it's becoming better understood. And the barrier to entry is actually being reduced. People from boot camps can jump into the data science role. You don't have to have a software engineering degree or a PhD role to jump into this world. You can come from all kinds of backgrounds. There's even folks who don't even go through a boot camp. They're just self-taught and they got themselves into the world of data science. And that's incredible because I think the role is becoming better understood, that data scientists are problem solvers. And if you learn on your own the fundamentals of data science and statistics, the fundamentals of programming, and you have strong business sense, you have a pretty good shot at getting a data science role.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. So going to your personal life, you hosting 2 podcasts. Can you tell us more about the podcast you're hosting?
Yeah, the one podcast I host is the Pandemic Job Hunt. That was a podcast that started right after the pandemic. And I remember last year when the pandemic started, so many people got laid off. So many people got furloughed. So many people didn't have a job. And it was scary. It was very uncertain at times. A lot of companies just froze their hiring practice for like a solid 3-4 months. And I think a lot of people were very scared and it was very stressful. I looked on LinkedIn, people are just, writing desperate posts, or people they're sharing like their experience. And that was scary. And I think it took 3 or 4 months until the job market became okay and people were hiring again. But I knew that the landscape of job hunting was so different now. Everything is remote. Everything is different. You can work in Canada, but your company is based in the States or your company is based in Europe. The opportunities and windows of working has changed. Plus, I did notice that LinkedIn and Twitter blew up. People are becoming a lot more warmer on those platforms. Before it was like a very professional platform where people communicate in a very professional manner, but now it's becoming more casual and becoming more of a social media, I would say. So the working landscape has, I would say, became a bit more casual all over the world, and it was much easier to connect with people. So job hunting has definitely changed. You don't have to show up to a random company's doorstep and just give up your resume. You can network your way and try to understand who are the leaders and try to figure out how to get yourself into it. So the Pandemic Job Hunt podcast, the goal was to talk to all kinds of people from different backgrounds, marketing, sales, data science, software engineering, and understand like how did the hiring process and job hunt process change for those roles. And the goal is just to educate people different ways and different ideas to kind of stand out in the pandemic job hunt. Because every LinkedIn post you see now, our LinkedIn job post, you click on it and within the first day, 500 plus application has entered that. how do you really stand up amongst one out of like thousands of applications? And part of that is thinking of new strategies. And one strategy is through network. And this is the harsh truth, but a lot of these smaller companies, when they get so many inbound, they don't look at all of them. There's too much to go through. Larger companies do have the luxury because they have solid recruiting teams that are their job is to go through each application. But some of these smaller companies don't have that resource, so you have to think of other ways. And I've talked to some professionals and hiring managers at smaller companies, and one of them said they don't even look at the job application; they look at who emailed them and interview those people who emailed them, who actually did that cold reach. Of 1,000 applications, maybe 10 people emailed the hiring manager, and he just interviews those 10 people because they're very busy individuals and they don't have time to go through each application because they have other work to do. So they're trying to like find the path of least resistance. And the people who did send them a cold email, they stand out because they did an extra effort versus a cold apply. So that's one thing I think folks need to realize in today's world. Smaller companies and startups don't have full recruiting teams. They might not be able to go through tons and tons of resumes, and you have to find alternative methods to break into that conversation versus larger companies. So that's what the pandemic job hunt was about. Then the other podcast I had was called the Little Big Ideas Show, and it was a podcast born in the pandemic as well. I think initially there was a lot of stress and anxiety, like where is this going? The world was shut down. I couldn't go home to my family. It was just so difficult. Like you don't know what's happening. And I think the whole goal of that is trying to figure out ways to be happy or be less stressed and take care of your mental health. And that's so important in the pandemic is we had this whole shift in society of how we live our day-to-day lives. And now we're cooped up in our homes. Luckily, today is much better, at least in my city. It's pretty much open. I can go anywhere I want. But initially, the lockdowns were hard. So the goal was to figure out ideas such as being in nature, trying to meditate or doing some journaling to help you ease your anxiety, focus on, just figure out ways to have a better and stress-free life because we don't want stress and anxiety. We want happiness and be focused and healthy. So that was the Little Big Idea shows, unrelated to data science or job hunting. It was just a pure passion project of mine. But the pandemic job hunt was focused on job hunting in the pandemic. And those are the two podcasts I did. Yeah.
Awesome. So what is the future of job search, you think, especially in the data science field?
The future of job hunting? That's very hard to predict. I don't know if I can see the next 5 years, but I do think there's going to be more consolidation of what the different roles are. Companies will have a better understanding. Do you want a data scientist who is expertise in deep learning, or do you want a data scientist who just knows the classical machine learning? So more refinement of those roles. So data science roles become a bit more specific. Companies will better understand like what is a data engineer and what is a data analyst, what's a machine learning specialist, or what's a product analyst. They'll better understand that, and these roles become more defined. And I think that's going to be a good thing because now folks won't get too overwhelmed if they look at a job posting and there's so much requirements for this job posting and so much technologies to know. I think companies will better figure out and understand like what they're looking for, and it'll be clearly communicated in the job posting. I think the job hunt will going to be the same. You still have to use your invisible networks and to get your foot in the door to reach out to people in a non-traditional way. What's great is the job market is picking up, especially in technology, especially in data. There's so much opportunity and there's so much growth that it's still early to get your foot in the door, and you can still have a great career in this role. And I think also in the future, things will become more dynamic. So someone who's in data science can transition easily to something else, and a different person from a different role can transition easily into data science as the word data science and what the fundamentals are becoming clearly understood, and the barrier to entry will reduce. So that's definitely what I see in a job hunt in the next 5 years of data science. Do you have any take on that? I'm so curious.
I think you had a great insights. I think in the future, I hope people can build more portfolio project and reach out to recruiters. It's kind of like you're pitching for the company. I think it would be more interesting for candidates to use this approach instead of just apply online, or maybe the online application. I hope there's some improvement instead of just looking for keywords in the resume. Maybe people can also submit their project, or it could be some sort of small meetings. Recruiters can talk to like 10 candidates, actually know who they are, because sometimes people have great skills, they just somehow have a bad resume. And I think it's a shame we don't give those people a chance.
I totally agree. Yeah, getting a job is hard. Everyone has their own strengths and weaknesses. And from a recruiter's perspective, like I can empathize. They have a hard job.
Yeah.
In one hand, a lot of people don't like recruiters because they're cold and harsh. And on one hand, like recruiters' goal is to help folks get hired. Their goal is to find the best candidate. And they're also looking to build a network as well. So if they're becoming expert recruiter, even if they reject you in this job, they'll remember you. So make sure you treat your recruiter right. But I agree, a recruiter's job is hard. And if a recruiter has no idea what data science is about, they need to spend some time understanding what data science is and how to hire a technical applicant. And that's a separate skill set that recruiter needs to know. But I'm not an expert in recruiting, but I do agree that there should be better opportunities to assess people, not necessarily through resume. And I think the best people who don't have the best resume, sometimes just the networking approach might be the best option to have.
Yeah, I think you brought up a good point. Recruiters want to help candidates get hired. So during the interview process, you can also ask your recruiter, hey, what should I expect for my next round? You can ask them this question because there are so many things you need to study for data science. And you can ask them, what are the topic you need to focus on? What is the format is going to be? As long as you don't ask them like specific interview questions, you can totally build a relationship with a recruiter and ask for help.
Yeah, I totally agree. Always communicate with your recruiter. That's their job. They want the best experience for both parties, the company and the other person, because at the end of the day, it's also the reputation of the companies at the end of the day at hand. Because if the recruiter is not doing a good job and it alienates certain candidate, that means that this company might not get the best candidate on the job. So a recruiter's job is to make sure every party wins here and try to find the best opportunity for everybody here. So that's what we have to keep in mind when we're working with recruiters. They're people at the end of the day, they're humans. Treat your recruiter right. Don't be too mean about them and don't complain about them too much. We're all human here and they're still learning to improve the process. And I understand initially in the pandemic, damn, these recruiters were getting so much inbound and they're still getting so much inbound. And but hopefully as more employment is going across the world and unemployment rates are reducing, then recruiters might have a better opportunity to maybe spend more time on each person. So that's a good sign. So if the economy is doing well, then the opportunities for everybody is much better.
Yeah. So before we wrap up, what's something exciting in your life or in your career that you want to share with us?
I'll talk about in my life. What I'm excited about is I'm excited for the holidays.
Yeah.
It's November now, and it's been a long year, and I'm excited for like a little break in the holidays and going with my partner to relax in Mexico for a little bit.
Nice.
So that's something I'm excited for personally. I'm also excited in my life in terms of being able to see my parents very soon. The pandemic has meant that I couldn't see my parents for a while. They are based in Vietnam, and Vietnam has pretty strict rules to enter the country. So I haven't been able to go back, but things are opening up and I'm happy and excited to go back and rekindle. So I think this year, now that people are being vaccinated, means life can go back to somewhat normal, and being able to reconnect with a lot of people in person is something I've been looking forward for, and to travel more freely is something I'm really excited for. On a career side, there's some exciting things I want to say, but there's a lot of things I can't announce because of my work. It's not announced in public, but there's some exciting things that will be announced very soon.
Cool.
But I can't announce on the show yet.
That's okay. So if people
Yeah.
want to keep up with those updates or reach out to you, how can they find you?
Best way to find me is through LinkedIn. You can find my name, Andrew Barry. I'm probably the only Andrew Barry in Toronto. And you can find me there. I'm always smiling. And you can also find me on Twitter at Andrew HN Barry. That's my Twitter handle as well. So those are the two platforms I'm active on, and the two platforms I communicate with people the most.
Great. Thank you so much, Andrew, for coming to the show.